Some hikers are not alone, even when the trail looks empty. Silence can feel staged, like something is holding back on purpose. From an Oregon winter hike where slow steps stayed just out of sight until a camp was found disturbed and strangely set, to a Colorado backcountry slope where a snowcat sat silent and evidence changed by morning, the same patience shows through. In this video, we'll explore 6 unsettling stories of people who felt a presence tracking them. On December 9, 2025, 24-year-old Tyler Jensen entered the remote Cascade foothills of Oregon for a weekend hike he planned to record for an online survival project. He was known for camping alone, studying backcountry routes, and keeping careful notes about weather and terrain. His GoPro remained strapped to his chest, running through most of the day while he walked along narrow trails lined with thick fur and heavy snow. Before leaving, he radioed a friend with his planned route and expected check-ins, a routine he followed on every winter trip. Weather reports from that day showed clear skies with light wind and deep snow across shaded slopes. Tyler made steady progress during the morning hours, judging by the early video clips later recovered from his device. The footage documented calm terrain, frost on the branches, and distant ridgelines dark against the sky. Nothing unusual appeared in those first recordings, aside from occasional settling of snow from the canopy above. Around 2 p.m., his radio signal captured a brief transmission sent to a friend. He mentioned hearing heavy movement behind him on the trail, describing uneven thuds that carried through the snow. The audio included faint cracks from distant branches and a low rush of weight shifting through trees. He continued walking, and the camera captured slow, panning views of the forest, though nothing distinct moved within the frame. The sounds behind him continued at irregular intervals, steady enough to suggest a single source following his path without rushing. Later recordings captured deeper noise patterns. Although the camera never showed a clear shape, the microphone picked up slow impacts spaced unnaturally far apart. Tyler noted the sound while continuing his route, speaking quietly into the recorder. He described the movement as watching from the trees, shifting from one side of the trail to the other. Snow on the lower branches showed signs of recent disturbance, with several clusters bent down as if brushed aside. By mid-afternoon, he paused near a small opening where the forest thinned. The video showed his pack resting on the ground and faint shadows moving at the far edge of the clearing. The shadows appeared tall compared to the surrounding trunks, though the fog and shifting light made them unclear. His voice on the audio feed became tense as he described glimpsing a large, fur-covered outline slipping between trees. He continued reporting these sightings in brief statements, noting that the shape stopped often, remaining still while watching him from a distance. The next recordings grew unsteady. Tyler's breathing changed. He stated that the pacing around him had grown tighter, the steps forming wide arcs through the snow. The camera captured only drifting fog and dim light between dense branches. Then he stated that the movement had stopped again, this time much closer than before. Moments later, the stream cut off without warning. Search teams would later confirm that the final video ended abruptly, leaving the remaining events to be reconstructed from the scene itself. Search teams reached Tyler Jensen's last known coordinates the following morning, guided by his radio log and the last known location from the final minutes of his GoPro recording. Fresh snow covered most of the trail, but his earlier tracks remained visible until the terrain narrowed and curved toward a small, sheltered basin. Near this point, the path showed signs of sudden disturbance. Snow lay unevenly across the ground, pressed in wide, sweeping patterns unlike normal foot movement. Several low branches hung bent under unusual strain. Some snapped cleanly with smooth breaks not caused by ice. His campsite sat overturned in the center of the clearing. The shelter he had set up lay collapsed, with fabric pushed inward as if struck from multiple angles. Cooking equipment and supplies were scattered across the snow, yet certain items appeared arranged with purpose rather than thrown at random. His hiking poles formed a triangular shape near a boulder, each pole evenly spaced and upright. One sock rested carefully across the top of the stone. No other clothing lay nearby, and no sign suggested animal scavenging. Investigators documented the ground around the campsite before moving any debris. Large footprints circled the area in deliberate loops. Each impression measured far beyond human size, with deep toe marks pressed firmly into the soil beneath the snow. The stride length remained consistent, forming arcs that surrounded the clearing without crossing into the center. The prints continued along the tree line before stopping suddenly, leaving no trail leading away. No known wildlife matched the size, depth, or spacing of the impressions. Tyler himself was not found. Sweep teams expanded their search across the surrounding foothills, using dogs, drones, and thermal imaging. No trace of movement, clothing, or equipment appeared in the wider grid. His backpack remained in the collapsed shelter, containing food, spare gloves, and recorded notes that ended earlier in the day. The GoPro, recovered from the disturbed snow, showed only blank frames after the abrupt cutoff. Authorities reviewed all evidence and compared it with known animal behavior. No bear, elk, or other species demonstrated the combination of controlled pacing, object arrangement, and silent approach recorded at the scene. Reports listed the disappearance as unresolved, with no final conclusion. Weeks later, hikers in nearby areas reported slow, heavy steps echoing through the trees on calm nights, spaced far apart, moving with steady rhythm. Tyler Jensen was never recovered, and the clearing where his camp once stood remains avoided by locals who believe something watched him with deliberate intent that day in the snow. On July 16, 2020, summer daylight stretched long across a remote region of Montana as Park Ranger Ethan Marshall began a routine backcountry patrol. At 45 years old, Ethan was considered a dependable veteran, with over 20 years of experience navigating isolated terrain and monitoring protected wilderness zones. His patrol that day followed a familiar route along dirt access roads and foot trails rarely used by the public. He checked in earlier that morning, confirming his planned path and expected return time before nightfall. Weather reports from the area showed calm conditions throughout the day. Temperatures were mild, and no storms were forecast. The forest stood quiet under clear skies, with only light wind moving through the upper branches. Ethan traveled alone in his service-issued SUV, carrying standard field equipment that included a notebook for observations, a thermos, and personal gear he kept during long patrols. Records later confirmed that no mechanical issues were reported with the vehicle prior to his departure. When Ethan failed to make his scheduled check-in that evening, supervisors attempted to reach him by radio. After repeated attempts went unanswered, a search request was initiated. Several hours later, another ranger located Ethan's SUV parked along a narrow dirt road well within the patrol zone. The vehicle sat straight along the shoulder, engine cold, headlights off. Both doors were locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry or collision. Tire tracks leading to the site matched earlier travel but showed no departure marks beyond the parked position. Searchers expanded the area around the vehicle. The surrounding ground showed no footprints leading away from the road. Flashlights swept across brush and trees without revealing disturbed soil or broken branches. A faint footpath extended toward a small clearing a few hundred feet from the road, partially hidden by undergrowth. Teams followed this route carefully, documenting ground conditions as they moved. The clearing opened into a quiet space bordered by low shrubs and scattered trees. A fallen log lay across the center, covered in moss and partially sunken into the soil. Ethan Marshall's body was discovered there, positioned atop the log. His arms were extended in an unnatural manner. One rested across his chest, while the other draped loosely over a moss-covered branch. His posture did not align with a fall or collapse. His boots were not on his feet. Instead, they rested upright against the trunk of the log, placed neatly side by side. No blood was visible at the scene. His clothing remained intact, and there were no immediate signs of trauma. Investigators noted the unusual positioning of his body and equipment. Nearby, Several small items Ethan carried during patrol were arranged with care. His notebook, thermos, and hat formed a neat semicircle on the ground near the log, spaced evenly rather than scattered. Around the perimeter of the clearing, deep footprints pressed into the soil. Each print was wide and long, far exceeding the size of any human foot. The impressions circled the clearing multiple times, forming overlapping paths that showed repeated movement. No tracks led back toward the dirt road or into the surrounding forest. As night settled over the site, investigators prepared to secure the area, aware that further examination would be required to understand what had taken place. The clearing was secured overnight, and investigators returned at first light to complete a detailed examination. Measurements of the footprints showed each impression exceeded normal human length by a wide margin, with pressure marks indicating extreme weight. The spacing between steps suggested a long, deliberate stride. Soil samples confirmed the prints were made after recent moisture, meaning they occurred close to the time Ethan Marshall went missing. No shoe prints or animal tracks overlapped the larger impressions. The fallen log where Ethan lay showed no signs of impact or breakage. Moss beneath his back remained intact, and the surrounding ground displayed no scuff marks or drag trails. His boots, placed upright against the trunk, were clean and free of damage. The soles showed no tearing or stress, and no matching tracks appeared anywhere else in the clearing. His clothing contained no cut, punctures, or signs of force. The arrangement of his body did not match patterns seen in falls, animal encounters, or medical emergencies. Medical examiners conducted an on-site review before transport. No fractures or visible injuries were present. Toxicology tests later returned clear results. Exposure was considered, but weather data showed mild conditions that did not align with typical hypothermia cases. The official report listed the cause of death as undetermined. Attention then returned to the arranged items near the log. The notebook contained standard patrol notes up to the final entry, which ended earlier that afternoon. The thermos remained sealed and warm to the touch when first recovered, suggesting it had not been left unattended for long. The hat showed no damage or signs of being torn away. Investigators noted that the placement of these items suggested awareness and intent rather than accidental loss. Search teams expanded the perimeter beyond the clearing. Despite extensive coverage, no additional evidence was found. The large footprints ended abruptly at the edge of the trees, and the forest floor beyond remained undisturbed. No path led away from the scene, and no indicators pointed back toward the road. Authorities reviewed possibilities involving wildlife, human involvement, and environmental factors. None aligned with the evidence present. Officials stated that no known animal could account for the size of the print or the organized nature of the scene. The case remained open, with no final explanation provided. In the months following the incident, the patrol route where Ethan was found was closed indefinitely. Rangers reported that the clearing felt unusually quiet, with fewer birds and insects than expected during summer patrols. Though no further incidents occurred, the area remained avoided by staff after dusk. Ethan Marshall's death stands unresolved, marked only by the footprint, the careful placement of his belongings, and the silent clearing where he was discovered. On July 17, 2023, 32-year-old Lucas Harding traveled into a remote region of northern Ontario with his close friend Eli Moreno. Both men were experienced campers who preferred quiet locations far from marked routes and public access points. The lake they chose sat deep within dense pine forest, reachable only by a long canoe approach followed by a short portage over uneven ground. Records from a nearby supply stop showed the pair had purchased food, fuel, and basic camping equipment 2 days earlier. Weather reports from the area indicated stable conditions with clear skies and mild evening temperatures. They set up their camp on a rocky stretch of shoreline where the trees opened just enough to allow a view across the water. Lucas secured his canoe near the edge of the lake, resting it flat against smooth stone. The surface of the water remained calm throughout the evening, broken only by small ripples near the far shore. As night settled, the forest around them grew quiet. No wind moved through the branches, and insect sounds faded earlier than expected. Sometime after midnight, both men later recalled waking briefly to low, rhythmic sounds moving around the tent. The noise carried a steady pattern, spaced evenly, and traveled slowly along the edge of the campsite. The ground beneath the tent showed no shaking, and the sounds did not resemble falling branches or waves against the rock. Believing the cause to be wildlife, they remained inside and did not investigate further. The noise eventually faded, leaving the area silent again. At first light, the campsite appeared altered. Lucas's canoe was no longer resting where it had been left. Instead, it lay tipped on its side halfway up the shoreline, pulled far beyond the waterline. Several paddle blades had been driven upright into the mud nearby, spaced in a rough arc facing the lake. The stones around the area showed scrape marks inconsistent with water movement or human handling. The surface of the canoe remained undamaged, though its position suggested it had been moved with force. Footprints pressed deeply into damp soil near the shoreline drew immediate attention. The impressions were large, wide, and lacked clear boot patterns. They formed a trail leading away from the water and into the dense pine forest behind the camp. No second set of tracks followed them back toward the lake. The ground along the forest edge showed disturbed needles and bent low branches, as if something had passed through without urgency. Lucas moved closer to the canoe, intending to pull it back toward the water. Eli remained near the tent, gathering equipment and watching the tree line. The forest stood still, with no animal movement or sound. Lucas stepped along the rocky slope near the paddles and moved out of Eli's direct view as the terrain dipped slightly toward the trees. Moments passed without sound. No call followed. When Eli looked again toward the shoreline, Lucas was no longer visible. The canoe remained tipped where it had been dragged, the paddles still standing upright in the mud. The footprints leading into the forest showed no new disturbance, and no sound came from beyond the pines as the morning light spread across the lake. Search efforts began within hours, once Eli Moreno reported Lucas Harding missing. Rangers reached the lake by late afternoon and secured the campsite. The canoe position was photographed, along with the paddles fixed upright in the mud. Examiners noted the blades had been pressed in with steady force rather than hammered. The rocky slope showed scrape lines leading upward, while the waterline remained undisturbed. Large footprints near the shore were measured and cast. Each impression was broad, deep, and uneven, with no tread mark. The trail led straight into the pines and ended after several meters without overlap or return. As teams moved inland, they found no broken brush consistent with a chase. The forest floor showed bent needles and lowered branches along a narrow path. Then nothing. Dogs failed to pick up a scent beyond the first stand of trees. No clothing, tools, or blood were found. Wind remained calm, and weather records showed no storms that could erase tracks that quickly. The lake stayed still through the search, with no waves or currents capable of moving the canoe to its position. Later that evening, Eli discovered Lucas's hat lodged high above the shoreline in the fork of a tall tree. The fabric showed no tears, and the brim was dry. The height required to place it exceeded a normal throw from the ground. Rangers documented the find and extended the search grid, checking ridges, inlet, and the far bank by boat. Night operations continued under light, but no movement or sound came from the forest. By the next morning, conditions had changed. The large footprints around the campsite had faded completely, though smaller animal tracks nearby remained visible. The casts taken the day before confirmed their earlier depth and width. No new prints appeared. The canoe remained where it had been dragged, unchanged. With no additional evidence, search leaders reduced operations after several days and listed the case as unresolved. Eli Moreno was escorted out and interviewed. He reported only the night sounds and the morning discovery. He was later released without injury. Residents in nearby communities began warning visitors about the lake, saying it watches quietly and takes what it studies. Many now avoid camping there, noting the shoreline feels observed after dark, while the water stays calm and silent. Officials kept the disappearance case open, citing limited evidence, difficult terrain, and the need for continued caution in the region. On November 3, 2024, 41-year-old hunter Viktor Lebedev traveled deep into the Siberian taiga to begin a solo hunting expedition. He was well known among nearby settlements for his experience with harsh winter terrain and elevated hunting methods. Victor had spent years tracking game across remote forest sections, often building raised blinds to stay above drifting snow and animal paths. Records from local supply depots confirmed that he gathered food, ammunition, and cold weather gear several days before leaving. He informed others that he would check in on a fixed schedule once his blind was set. The location Victor chose sat far from active roads, surrounded by dense pine and larch trees. The terrain consisted of uneven ground, fallen log, and narrow animal trails leading toward open clearings. In the week before Victor arrived, locals reported seeing unusual impressions pressed into soft ground near the forest edge. These marks were described as human-like, but far larger than any boot print. The tracks did not follow standard path and appeared to stop suddenly without continuing deeper into the wood. No official explanation was recorded at the time. Victor constructed his elevated blind using reinforced wood panels secured to a sturdy tree. The platform stood several meters above the ground, with a small enclosed space designed to shield against wind and snow. The blind included a narrow door that locked from the inside and a simple bench for long wait. Branches near the entrance were trimmed to allow a clear view across a game trail that passed below. His rifle remained stored upright within easy reach. Weather conditions during the first day remained stable. Temperatures stayed below freezing, and wind moved slowly through the canopy. Satellite data later showed no storms during that period. Victor's vehicle was parked several kilometers away, hidden from open paths to avoid drawing attention. Tracks leading from the vehicle toward the blind were faint but visible during early searches. When Victor failed to report at his scheduled time, concern grew among those expecting his check-in. After 2 days passed without contact, a small search team organized an approach to the site. Heavy forest coverage slowed movement, and snow began falling lightly during the trek. The team followed Victor's earlier trail markers until they reached the clearing where the blind stood. From the ground, the structure appeared undamaged. The door remained closed, and no signs of forced entry were visible. Snow beneath the platform showed multiple disturbances that did not match typical animal movement. Wide impressions pressed deeply into the ground formed looping paths around the base of the tree. Each print appeared longer and broader than human feet, spaced at intervals that suggested great weight and long stride length. Searchers noted snapped branches near the blind's entrance. The breaks were smooth and clean, not torn or splintered as seen in bear activity. No tracks led away from the area. No drag marks crossed the forest floor. As daylight faded, the team prepared to secure the area and examine the blind's interior, unaware that the scene above would deepen the mystery surrounding Viktor Lebedev's final hours. The search team reached the platform using safety lines and a portable ladder secured to the trunk. The door to the elevated blind was locked from the inside. After documenting the exterior, responders opened it under supervision. Inside the confined space, Viktor Lebedev was found slumped across the narrow bench. One arm extended downward toward the floor, while the other rested along the edge of the platform in a stiff, unnatural position. His posture suggested no sudden movement at the moment of death. The interior showed no damage, and the walls remained intact. A rifle leaned upright against the railing near the bench. The chamber was loaded, and the safety remained engaged. Ammunition stored inside the blind had not been disturbed. Clothing worn by Victor showed no tearing or blood. His boots were still on his feet, and no items appeared missing. The limited space offered little room for struggle, yet no marks suggested contact with another person or animal inside the enclosure. Medical personnel conducted an initial examination before removing the body. No external injuries were visible. There were no fractures, bite marks, or wounds consistent with wildlife encounters. Exposure was considered, but the posture, lack of movement, and controlled environment did not fit typical hypothermia indicators. The later report listed the cause of death as undetermined due to the absence of clear trauma or medical events. Attention returned to the area beneath the platform. The ground around the tree displayed deep, wide impressions arranged in repeated loops. Measurements showed lengths far exceeding human dimensions, with pressure marks indicating extreme weight. The spacing between impressions suggested long strides taken at a steady pace. These marks did not match bear tracks common to the region. Several impressions pressed directly into packed soil and snow at the base of the trunk, forming partial arcs around the structure. Nearby branches leading to the blind's entrance had been snapped cleanly. The breaks showed smooth compression rather than tearing, and the height of damage exceeded what local animals could reach without climbing. The pattern suggested force applied downward and inward toward the platform. Despite this, no prints appeared on the ladder or platform surface itself. Searchers expanded their sweep outward from the tree. Beyond the looping impressions, the forest floor remained largely untouched. No trail led away from the site. No equipment or personal items belonging to Victor were found beyond the blind. Snow conditions allowed clear visibility of the area, and fresh snowfall preserved the scene until documentation was complete. Investigators reviewed reports from the previous week describing large human-like tracks nearby. These earlier impressions aligned in size and shape with those found at the base of the blind. However, officials stated that no conclusion could be drawn connecting the reports directly to Victor's death. Authorities ruled out human involvement due to the locked interior and absence of entry paths. No known animal behavior explained the combination of strength, access, and lack of disturbance. The case was classified as unexplained, and the site was eventually cleared. Word spread quickly through nearby settlements. Some residents reported avoiding the forest section after dark. Others described heavy steps heard at night moving through dense trees, accompanied by brief moments of silence that followed. These accounts were not confirmed and remained anecdotal. Victor Lebedev's death continues to raise questions. The intact blind, locked door, unusual ground marks, and lack of injury remain unresolved factors. The elevated structure still stands unused in the taiga, overlooking the silent trail where something moved with purpose, leaving behind only impressions and unanswered doubts. On October 9, 2024, freight train operator Daniel Mercer guided a slow overnight run through the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, USA. He had worked the rails for many years and knew the grades, curves, and older structures along the route. The train moved at reduced speed due to maintenance limits, allowing the engine lights to sweep far ahead across gravel, steel, and cut stone. Weather reports showed clear skies and cold air, with no snow falling that night. The track approached an aging rail tunnel carved into a dark slope. The opening sat low against the mountainside, framed by rough rock and stained concrete. As the locomotive crept closer, the beam caught movement near the center of the rails. At first glance, the shape appeared similar to wildlife that often crossed the line at night. The distance closed steadily as the engine rolled forward, wheels clicking in a slow rhythm. The outline resolved into something far larger than expected. A tall, broad figure stood upright between the rails, centered and still. Its proportions did not match a person, and its lack of motion did not fit an animal preparing to flee. The shape filled a wide portion of the light, casting a heavy shadow against the tunnel mouth. The train continued forward at a controlled speed, closing the gaps second by second. Standard safety procedures required the horn to sound when an obstruction appeared on the track. The blast echoed off the rock walls and into the tunnel interior. Despite the noise and vibration, the figure did not react. It remained fixed in place for a brief moment, then shifted backward with measured movement. Rather than turning or running, it stepped directly into the darkness beyond the opening. No sound followed, and no movement stirred the dust. The locomotive reached the tunnel moments later. Engine lights swept along the interior walls, revealing thick layers of fine dust coating the stone. Along the right side, deep, wide impressions pressed into the powder at regular spacing. Each mark appeared barefoot, with rounded edges and a depth suggesting heavy pressure. The prints tracked along the wall for several yards before ending abruptly, as if the path had simply stopped. The train passed through without incident and emerged on the far side. Near the exit, the lights caught an unusual arrangement beside the track. Several large stones had been stacked into a narrow column, balanced carefully and positioned close to the rails. The structure stood intact, despite vibrations from passing trains. No fresh debris lay around it, and no other signs of activity appeared nearby. Daniel Mercer completed the run and documented the encounter according to company protocol. He noted the location, time, and conditions, describing the figure, the footprints, and the stone stack. At this stage, no additional evidence had been collected, and no explanation had been offered for what stood on the tracks that night. Operations continued under routine monitoring, with schedules unchanged, while the tunnel remained open and unremarked afterward by crews. Following Daniel Mercer's report, railway officials requested a site inspection the next morning. Maintenance crews and investigators arrived at the tunnel during daylight hours to examine the interior and surrounding track area. Weather conditions remained calm, and no overnight train traffic had disturbed the scene. Dust along the tunnel floor and walls remained intact, allowing clear documentation of surface markings. Inside the tunnel, investigators located the same wide impressions Daniel had described. The marks ran along one side wall at a consistent height and spacing. Measurements showed each print exceeded standard human foot length and width by a significant margin. The depth suggested heavy downward pressure rather than surface contact. No claw marks or tread patterns were present. The impressions ended suddenly halfway through the tunnel, with no scuffing or disturbance beyond that point. The opposite exit was examined next. The stacked stones remained upright beside the rails. Each stone was smooth, rounded, and heavy, collected from different areas near the track. The arrangement showed balance and intent, as none of the pieces appeared randomly placed. Vibration tests confirmed that normal train movement would not naturally form or maintain such a structure. No footprints or drag marks surrounded the stack. Search teams expanded their review beyond the tunnel entrances. Gravel, ballast, and nearby soil showed no continuation of tracks. Vegetation along the slopes remained undisturbed. There were no signs of animals crossing the rails, no broken brush, and no fallen debris indicating movement through the area. Camera footage from passing freight units showed no additional anomalies during previous nights. Authorities evaluated possible explanations, including wildlife, human activity, and environmental factors. None aligned with the size, shape, or placement of the impressions or the stone structure. Officials stated that the findings did not match known animal behavior and that there was no evidence of trespassing or vandalism. The incident was recorded as unexplained, with no determination made regarding the identity of the figure observed. Rail operations continued without interruption. Crews passing through the tunnel afterward reported no further sightings, though several noted an unusual stillness inside the structure, even during active runs. Sound carried differently through the space, and echoes seemed muted compared to similar tunnels along the route. These observations were noted but not formally investigated. Over the following weeks, the stone column was removed during routine maintenance, and the tunnel walls were cleaned as part of standard safety procedures. The impressions disappeared with the dust, leaving no visible trace behind. Despite this, word of the incident spread quietly among rail workers familiar with the line. Some avoided slowing near the tunnel at night, choosing to maintain speed through the area. Local residents living near the mountain pass later reported hearing deep, isolated sounds echoing from the ridge after dark. These accounts described low impacts that did not resemble rockfall or wildlife movement. No source was identified, and no official reports linked the sounds to the earlier event. Daniel Mercer continued working his assigned routes. He did not encounter the figure again, and no similar reports followed from other operators. The tunnel remains in service, appearing unchanged during daylight inspections. The incident record remains archived, noted only as an unexplained obstruction sighting with unusual physical traces. The tracks through the Rockies carry trains nightly, cutting through silent slopes and dark stone passages. What stood within that tunnel remains unknown, leaving behind only a brief encounter, vanished prints, and a stretch of rail where something large once waited without sound. On January 12, 2025, winter conditions covered a remote backcountry slope in Colorado, where ski patroller Logan Price carried out late-night safety checks after a heavy snowfall. At 35 years old, he had worked several seasons in alpine terrain, monitoring slopes used by guided groups, and maintaining equipment routes far from public lifts. Records showed he was assigned to survey an upper section of backcountry access where snowcats were sometimes staged for grooming and rescue operations. The area was steep, tree-lined, and rarely traveled after dark. Shortly before midnight, Logan noticed an unusual shape along the slope while moving between marked points. A snowcat sat idle near the edge of a narrow run, its position angled slightly downhill. The engine was cold and no exhaust haze lingered in the air, suggesting it had not been running for some time. Tracks behind the vehicle appeared incomplete, pressing into the snow but failing to form a continuous path leading away from the machine. Logan approached carefully and examined the interior through the side window. The controls remained untouched, with switches and levers resting in standard positions. No damage appeared on the cab, and the doors were closed. Inside, supplies normally stored loosely had been arranged into precise geometric patterns along the floor and bent. Medical kit, rope coils, and emergency tools sat aligned at clean angle. Logan's own backpack, which had been left inside earlier that evening, rested near the seat. The zipper was fully closed, but thin sticks had been threaded through the zipper loop, securing it shut in an unusual way. Outside the vehicle, snow showed additional markings. Large footprints pressed deeply into the slope, forming a rough circle around the snowcat. The prints were wide, with splayed shapes that did not match any boot or known wildlife track in the region. Several impressions approached within inches of the snowcat's own track mark, overlapping without disrupting them. The depth of the prints suggested significant weight applied slowly rather than quick movement. Logan attempted to contact base support using his radio. The signal returned only static, despite clear conditions and confirmed coverage in that zone. He documented the scene with photographs and flagged the location before withdrawing to a safer distance. The slope remained quiet, and no movement came from the surrounding forest. As night passed into early morning, snow conditions remained stable. At first light, Logan returned to the site to recheck the snowcat's position. The vehicle remained where it had been found. The tracks leading downhill appeared unchanged, still failing to connect to any exit route. The surrounding forest stood dense and still, with branches weighed down by snow. The snowcat's trail extended only a short distance before veering toward a steep gully lined with thick trees. The track marks faded partway up the incline, disappearing abruptly without disturbance beyond that point. Logan marked the area for follow-up, preparing to return later with additional personnel to document the site under full daylight conditions, unaware that several details would not remain as they appeared. Later that morning, Logan Price returned to the slope with a small search team made up of fellow patrollers and forest staff. Daylight revealed the area more clearly, allowing for a careful comparison between the conditions observed during the night and those now present. Almost immediately, differences became apparent. The large footprints that had circled the snowcat hours earlier were no longer visible. Fresh snow had not fallen in sufficient volume to erase them, yet the surface around the vehicle now appeared smooth and undisturbed. The interior of the snowcat was checked again. The supplies that had previously been stacked into sharp geometric patterns were no longer arranged in that manner. Equipment sat in more typical positions, similar to how items might shift during routine use. Logan's backpack remained inside, still zipped shut, but the thin sticks that had been threaded through the zipper loop were gone. No broken fragments or debris were found nearby to explain their removal. Search teams followed the snowcat's track line toward the gully where the trail had ended. As before, the track mark stopped abruptly halfway up the steep incline. Beyond that point, the snow showed no sign of machine movement, sliding, or collapse. However, the trees lining the gully displayed unusual changes. Several trunks had been bent outward away from the path, their branches pushed aside rather than broken. The bends followed a narrow route up the slope, based in a way that suggested something large had moved through with deliberate step. Investigators documented the tree damage carefully. The direction of the bends indicated outward pressure rather than downward force from falling snow. No avalanche activity had been recorded in the area during that time frame. Wildlife specialists confirmed that animals native to the region could not produce such uniform bending at that height or spacing. Despite this, no tracks or prints accompanied the disturbed trees. Authorities reviewed the findings and assessed possible explanations. Mechanical malfunction, human interference, and environmental factors were all considered. Officials stated that the snowcat had not been reported missing, nor had it been scheduled for overnight use. No evidence supported vandalism or theft. The absence of clear tracks or tool marks prevented investigators from assigning responsibility. The case was classified as unexplained with no indication of danger from known wildlife. Logan provided a formal report describing the initial discovery and the changes observed by morning. His account noted the loss of physical evidence without corresponding weather activity to explain it. While his radio malfunction during the incident was logged, technicians later confirmed that equipment checks showed no faults after recovery. In the weeks following the event, the slope remained closed to routine patrol traffic during night hours. Staff working nearby reported an increased sense of unease when operating alone after sunset. Some described finding minor equipment repositioned between shifts, though none of these incidents could be verified through cameras or log. No further activity involving the snowcat was reported. The vehicle was eventually removed from the slope and inspected, revealing no mechanical issues. The bent trees along the gully remained in place, slowly settling back under the weight of snow as winter progressed. Logan Price returned to regular duties, but avoided that section of backcountry whenever possible. The incident was discussed quietly among patrollers as an example of something that could not be easily explained or documented. Official records closed the matter without conclusion. What remained were the altered trees, the vanished print, and the unanswered question of what had moved through the slope during the silent hours before dawn.